Greetings and welcome to Beatles Stuffology. We're two old friends sit around and talk BS, Beatles stuff, on a track-by-track basis, pretty much for the sake of it. My name is JG McQuarrie, and I'm here with my co-host, Andrew Deacon. Say hi, Andrew.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing tickety-boo, actually. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. I'm looking forward to talking about one of Showaddywaddy's best ever songs today.
Excellent. It's not often that you get to drop a Showaddywaddy reference in a podcast at any time, far less one involved with the Beatles. But I'm afraid we must continue with our grand search through Beatles for Sale, which means we reach one of many, many cover versions. And this time out, it's rock and roll music. So, time to engage with Mr. Berry. What's your thoughts on this one?
I should caveat my first comment by saying I don't actually know if Showaddywaddy did a cover version of rock and roll music, but I kind of think it's the sort of thing they might have done.
It's their wheelhouse, right?
Yeah, and I think a word that we use quite a lot at the start of this mega run of episodes was context, and I suppose my context for hearing this song and being aware of Chuck Berry's is very much me being a youngish child in the 1970s when on Summertime Special you would get the likes of Showaddywaddy doing those great big hits of the 50s in their awful, colourful suits. And so I think my appreciation, and I think this is quite an important point, my appreciation of some of the rock and roll pioneers is clouded by Showaddywaddy. Whereas, of course, the Beatles and the audience in the early 60s appreciation of these rock and roll pioneers is a lot more immediate. So I reckon that potentially the further you are from the original point of contact, the more chance that you might have a different view of just how great Mr. Tapes of Urination on People, Chuck Berry, actually is.
That's fair. A hasty bing informs me that Showaddywaddy covered rock and roll music and released it on their album Trocadero in 1976.
And I bet the B-side was Three Steps to Heaven, because the one thing I can always remember them playing is, I reckon Three Steps to Heaven they released every 6 months, because you know what? It's Showaddywaddy.
They may still be doing that. I can't be bothered. I can't be bothered to Google further and find out whether that's the case.
Do you want to take a quick gamble on how many of the original members are still in Showaddywaddy? I reckon they're probably down to one. Coming to a seafront pavilion near you soon.
I reckon the only original thing left in the entire band might be one blue suede shoe. That's probably all that's left of them at this point. But anyway, yeah. So you're entirely correct. That this is exactly the kind of song that they would have covered, and it's a popular old one on the old coverometer. I mean, there are lots of different cover versions we can talk about, but I suppose we should probably talk about the Beatles version before we dive into those.
Yeah, okay, go on then. Go ahead, because it fills an interesting point on the album, doesn't it? In that we've had a reasonably, positive start of Lennon and McCartney songs, and almost as though the momentum that might have been gained from the initial part of the album, we're now resorting to something that's a little bit more formulaic.
I think formulaic's not a bad word for it. It's interesting because obviously this is a song that they did right up until 1966, so it's going to be hanging around for a long time. But it's not... I don't know. Maybe you're welcome to disagree with this, and I'm sure this isn't probably the general consensus. I don't think it's a terribly great cover version, truth be told. There's something a bit... something a bit desperate about the way that it sounds, and I think it comes a lot from Ringo, actually. There's a sense where, the old the old mythology of, we couldn't hear ourselves play, and Ringo's just trying to hang on to the beat so that he can keep everything together, all the rest of it. I think this is one of the songs, as far as album recordings go, where you can really hear that being the case, because there's no invention at all. He's just hanging on the cymbal, and a lot of that just sounds, really partly because of the recording technology at the time, but a lot of it basically just sounds like static almost. It's very shrill, and it kind of, it doesn't add energy. In fact, if anything, I think it saps the energy from a lot of the recording. And Lennon's going for it with vocals, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff we'll talk about. But I think ultimately that one of the reasons this feels like it saps a bit of the momentum that's been built up is that percussion. There's some inventiveness going on with No Reply, I'm a Loser, and Babies in Black, and particularly because Babies in Black shifts into that kind of waltz time. It gives the album a bit of texture, but here all that is just kind of flattened out into one kind of solid sort of wall of cymbals, and it leaves the record sounding a little bit kind of desperate, a little bit kind of over enthusiastic, like come on, we're having fun, this is terribly exciting. Ultimately it kind of isn't.
So maybe we're regressing into the type of cover versions, because we are still talking about early days of rock and or roll. We're into the point where you are showing your influences. I know it's something we've spoken about before. You show your influences by playing songs by your favourite artists, and you effectively replicate them rather than add your own. So we've seen them do this before on lots of these covers. They're not necessarily developing, changing. They're just adding their own personality to it, and certainly John's personality comes across in it, and that's fine. And we've seen it as well before with some covers, early covers of Beatles songs, like for example on I Feel Fine, where lots of the early covers in the first 5-10 years all had that introduction, the picky guitar introduction, because they felt that not that they had to do something particularly original, but that they were just doing their version of the recording. So, it's also one of those songs, isn't it, that they're doing because they know it and they can knock it out reasonably quickly because they're under pressure of a deadline. So I suppose they're probably not going to put in the amount of time, the number of takes that they would put into something that, again, they thought of as being their own and something that they wanted to present as extensions of themselves rather than extensions of their influences. And it's fine. It's an okay song. It's not as legendary, I think, as some other Chuck Berry songs. But it's fine. It's fun. They get it done. It's out of the way. But it really does halt the progress from Babies in Black into I'll Follow the Sun. It just seems like an odd choice of song and an odd position as well. Just weird. But it's interesting to hear you be not so much critical, but slightly disappointed by Mr. Starr. And considering you are normally an advocate of the expression Ringo's doing really good work on this track, it's interesting, therefore, that you say that, because that just makes me go, right, perhaps I need to go back and have another listen to see what he is doing on this.
Yeah, it's fair enough to criticize somebody when they're coming up short, and I do think I think that is the influence of the live work. That's it. This is a knock it out and get it done. We know they're out of gas as far as the writing is concerned. They need something to fill up the album. They can turn to this, and they've been doing it long enough that they don't need to think twice about it. But ultimately, I think that's what undermines it, because they're not thinking twice about it, and so they're just doing what they do on stage, but in the studio. And unfortunately for Ringo, in this case, that means just hammering away in the cymbals and not sort of really giving much in the way of the texture. I mean, there's the shift when we go to, Mambo and Congo and all that kind of stuff in that verse. So, the time signature shifts there, and there's a little bit of stuff, but it's still, I don't know, it's relatively uninspired. And one of the things that I think really works against it as well is, and I find myself having to disagree with Ian MacDonald on this one, which I'm sure he'll be gutted by. But it's he says that Lennon is going full throttle at the vocal, which he absolutely is, and that gives it an energy where Chuck Berry's version has a little bit more ambiguity to it. But I think the problem with that is that this song benefits from having a little bit of ambiguity in it, whereas Lennon's kind of full pelt vocal sort of flattens that. It kind of smears it out. So I think the song that this actually bears the most comparison to is Twist and Shout. Twist and Shout really benefits from that, and the original version of Twist and Shout also is a little bit gentler. It's a little bit more subtle. But when Lennon throws himself at it, he really energizes it and brings something and draws something out of it that isn't there in the original. Whereas this one, it's not only the same approach. It's another song which is being recorded at the end of a long kind of 8-hour studio session. So it's being recorded pretty much in exactly the same way as Twist and Shout. But where Twist and Shout was able to capture like the energy and enthusiasm and verve and spark of what has now become a classic recording, this doesn't. It sounds knackered. Like everybody is trying so hard to put energy into it, but everybody just kind of sounds exhausted on it, to be honest. And Lennon's sort of full pelt vocal takes one of the few redeeming features of the song and kind of smears it out, and it just doesn't quite come together for me. It's a good vocal performance, but it's not quite the right vocal performance for this song, I would say.
Yeah, it strikes me that this is a song you can play too fast, and actually you probably don't want to. You probably want to slow it down slightly and actually then get a feel for the rhythm rather than rush it and kind of lose it. There's something about the lyrics. I mean, this is... Let me think about how I can say this. I mean, this it seems to be a song about the black experience or elements of the black experience. And I can't help but wonder if some of my reluctance with this song is possibly because of that, because it's, another bunch of white boys singing it, and there's a whole ton of a bunch of white boys who've covered this over the years because it's Chuck Berry and we need to show our appreciation of where the music comes from, man. And it's self-referential, like Roll Over Beethoven, and we got rock and roll music. It's a song about this new thing, but it does make me feel slightly awkward when you sort of think that way down south they had a jubilee. Them Georgia folks, they had a jamboree. They're drinking homebrew from a wooden cup. The folks are dancing. They're all shook up. There's something about that doesn't sound quite right out of the mouths of British people, I reckon.
Well, I took my loved one over across the tracks and she can get her man a wailing sax.
Yeah.
That's the one that stands out for me, because that's just, there isn't really a sort of British equivalent of that. So it sounds, but I get it. People weren't talking about that kind of thing in 1964.
No, but that's where context is important again, isn't it?
Well, absolutely, yes.
I don't think that was particularly bothering me in the 70s. I think it was more just an aversion to Showaddywaddy. And I just can see how many times I can say that word during this episode. But I think now, times have changed. I think maybe also a few weeks ago we talked about She's a Woman and how She's a Woman has one of the worst rhymes or one of the worst couplets in the history of good music. And I'm going to caveat that with good music. Bearing in mind that he rhymes tracks with sax and jubilee with jamboree. Jazz and fast? What's going on there? What is going on there? And it's just, I've got no kick against modern jazz unless they try to play it too darn fazz. I'm going to go with that. But
it's not a perfect couplet.
I realise here that my... See, I think it's a perfectly fine performance of a song that they know really, really well, and they could knock out fairly quickly. I just don't think it's that good a song. I think it doesn't make the hair stand up on the back of your neck in the way that a really raw performance of Memphis, Tennessee or Johnny B. Good would, for example, which are just phenomenal songs. Even Roll Over Beethoven really has some zip and punch to it. That's fair enough. But I think rock and roll music is just kind of evidence that Chuck Berry's cannon is a little toy cannon, not a large artillery cannon.
Excellent work, sir. Excellent work.
That's what the listener comes here for. Yeah.
Yeah. No, no arguments there. Yeah, it's one of those songs that I think. I mean, there's only three chords in this song, so in just purely in terms of the music, it's incredibly simple. It's E seventh, A seventh, and D seventh. So, I mean, almost anybody who's ever picked up a guitar can play this song and knock it out. And that might also, to some extent, account for its popularity because just literally anybody can play it.
Yeah.
It's incredibly straightforward.
Yeah.
Everyone knows it. You can play it at parties even now, and fine. And that probably helps to push its popularity a wee bit as well. It's another one though that its simplicity is its strength, and trying to put too much into it undermines it. So if you, I don't know if you listened to the Beach Boys cover of this. It's truly awful, and yet in some ways I actually like it more than the Beatles version because at least it sounds like they've invested something of their own personality into it. Whereas the Beatles version sounds pretty straightforward, just thrashed away.
I see your Beach Boys cover, and I raise you REO Speedwagon.
Don't raise me REO Speedwagon, please. Don't do it.
Absolutely horrendous.
Oh, it's awful. It's so very, very bad.
But I'm gonna. Okay, all right. So it's a bit unfair to kick REO Speedwagon because there are lots of other people that have done that. It's even a bit unfair to kick the Beach Boys in the 70s because you know what, anyone could do that. The cover version that irritated me the most is actually one that I would have owned. I no longer do. It's on the B-side of a Manic single from 2000 called again, an awful rhyme. The Masses Against the Class. Anyway, on the B-side they covered Rock and Roll Music, but they seemed to cover it as though Status Quo were playing it. And it's worth listening because of that. And I can't work out if it's a massive joke. I don't know the Manics that well to know whether or not that would have been a massive joke, or whether because they were so earnest about the way that they were recording it, that it just sounded like a Status Quo cover of Chuck Berry. It's an absolute dream. But again, this is the kind of thing that I'm going to blame the Beatles for. Let's say the Beatles started all of this, that the Beatles were one of the early bands to cover on record rock and roll music. And maybe that's where the conversation about the kind of songs the Stones were covering, the kind of songs the Beatles were covering is worth thinking about, because the Stones were in general doing more authentic blues and rock covers, by artists perhaps you might not have heard of. In fact, many you may still not have heard of. They chose the song, and I wonder if with rock and roll music the Beatles chose the artist. Oh yeah, we do Chuck Berry covers. I know we do the girl groups, but we also do Chuck Berry, and we do Carl Perkins, and we'll also do Buddy Holly. So we'll throw this one in. They did do, by the way, earlier in '64, they did do a cover of Johnny Be Good on a BBC radio programme, and it's really good. I like it. But then maybe Johnny Be Good is a song that's so bulletproof, I even like the Michael J. Fox version from Back to the Future. Who knows?
I can't answer that question. I can tell you that another hasty Bing has informed me that Status Quo have indeed covered rock and roll music, as apparently every single human being on planet Earth seems to have done at this point.
It's not a surprise. A search, Bing. Oh dear.
Other search engines are available.
Whatever. We're not on the BBC. A search has also suggested that there is only one current member of Showaddywaddy in the band, and that is the wonderfully named Romeo Challenger.
Excellent.
I do realise that this is going to be a short episode, folks. You're probably relieved to hear. We've only been going about 19 minutes, and I think let's just say I've spoken for about half of that. I realise probably only about 30 seconds actually talking about the Beatles. So apologies, folks. I'll make up for it on the next episode. I promise.
It's okay. I don't think it's the episode that we've spoken about the song the least on thus far. So I think we're actually slightly ahead of the game. I think so far I'm a loser. I can't remember what it was now. Maybe it was I'm a Loser. There's definitely an episode where we basically just didn't talk about the song, and we have actually managed to talk about this song. So I feel we've managed pretty good for a pretty kind of cover.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I'm done.
All right.
We could mention their live set. They play it a lot live. It's fun. Blah blah blah. So on and so forth. But if you listen to this podcast, you probably knew that.
Exactly, and we don't want to be the sort of podcast that just recites information that everybody's already aware of. You come here for bad puns and Ringo praise, and that's pretty much it.
Although that said, we have done various searching for things on various search engines in this episode, and then relayed that information straight from the internet.
Fantastic. Well, I never said that we were consistent. Right, let's give this a score and put it to bed. What do you want to give it? Five. Yeah, I'm fine with that as well. 5. Right, we
Can't even extend that discussion to complete agreement on the fact
I don't really know what else to say.
Bang average for the Beatles.
Lovely. Right, you can really get a hold of us. That's a better cover version. You can contact us by email. We are BeatlesStuffology@gmail.com. We are on Twitter at Beatles_ology. We are Beatles Stuffology on Instagram. You can find my blog at www.jgmcquarrie.scot. And you can read Andrew's writing at www.stuffology.co.uk. Please also check out my other podcast, which is Talking Trek to You, where a noob and an expert go through the original series of Star Trek episode by episode. Please like, rate, and review us on whatever podcatcher you're using so that more people can find this show. And people are finding the show, and we are very grateful to all our listeners who have joined us. Please keep doing so. Next episode, I'll follow the sun. But until then, keep listening.